Every week, we like to give you an academic tip, something that sets your child up for success at school, because it's important, right? A great deal of, if you're sending your child out the door to a school site, it's a lot of their day that they're gone. If you're homeschooling, it's a huge undertaking, right? Either way, we want to set our children up for success. And one of the things that we'll see is that, in not all cases, but in a lot of cases, our children need some extra support. They may need time with a speech and language pathologist. They may need occupational therapy. They may need adaptive PE, a whole host of things that might be offered to us within the school setting as part of our IEP, as part of our free appropriate public education, those services that they offer. But it's one thing to get an offer for those services, and it's yet another to figure out how they're going to be delivered and on what schedule. And a lot of times we'll hear the school site talking about a pull out or a push in. Does the speech and language pathologist come to class while the child is in class time and work with them within the classroom and within what the class is actually working on? Or does the child leave the classroom and go to the speech and language pathology room and work one-on-one or in a small group? Which of those is going to work the best for the child? And what I want to talk about today is how we determine what's best for the child. A lot of times, the first offer that a school will give you will be what's right for the child. Sometimes it'll be what's right for the school and won't necessarily fit the child's individual needs. And I had mentioned on the show the other day that I'm a big fan of, for my child, the push in, and I am adamantly opposed to the pull out situation, although we did do that in previous years. And somebody had written in and said, let's talk more about this. What are the considerations? So let's start right from the beginning. As we're looking at this, there are a couple of things that we want to keep in mind while we're making our decisions as a parent of what's going to be best for our child. First thing that we want to consider is, what are the priorities for the individual child? As you look at your child's skill set and where they're behind and where they need to get caught up, what kinds of things are your highest priority? Is your child academically behind? Are they socially in a place where we really want to see some improvement? Because it's literally their ability to socially communicate might be hurting their ability to access the curriculum. Is your child someone who is fine academically? They're caught up, but they have a lot of sensory issues, and they get to a boiling point and at some point during the day where they can't focus because there's so much sensory going on? Or do they have other priorities? So really asking yourself, if I were going to rate these things of what's most important, where would social be? Where would sensory be? Where would academic be? And if there are more things on the list, list all of them. What's the hierarchy here? Because sometimes you're going to have something happen where you can work on 2 or 3 at a time, and sometimes you're only going to be able to have one. So which one do you want to choose? Plan that out for yourself so that you know where your priorities are. I think when we get pushed around by other entities, it's because we're not 100% clear about what we need and what we want for our kids. So when we're clear, it makes it much easier to say no. That's not going to happen, which I'm queen of doing. Also knowing what are the time constraints. And I'm talking about what are the time constraints for you and your child. When my son was in kindergarten, I did not want him taken out of his classroom, not once, not for a second, no way, no how, because he was going half day. So if he was there for half day, it was this one-shot opportunity for him to be working on academics and working on social stuff, and it wasn't so long that I felt that he needed to be pulled out for sensory issues. But there was we were having therapy in the afternoon, but there were unscheduled half hours where he could have speech, and he wouldn't have to be taken out of his class and miss something. So that was my focus in kindergarten. In first grade, that wasn't as much the case. So, there were times when it was more appropriate for him to be pulled out. But what's the time constraint constraint for your child. If they're going to kindergarten and they're there full day and then you're coming home and doing therapy, are you able to do things outside the classroom? Are you able to take them to OT at 3:30 in the afternoon? Is it going to work for your child? Are they going to be exhausted? So what are the time constraints? That has to be factored into this. And then, of course, the last one is what's possible, because you may hear from your school, well, we're just not going to do that. I think it's important to check the school's regulations. One of the things that we saw, we were told early on, well, the rule is, when I asked for the pullout, to be done at a different time, not during instruction time, we were told, well, the rule is that these things have to be done during school time. And I said, show me where in the bylaws. I was able to look it up and see that that was true, that it was during school hours. And since my son was only going to school half day, it meant that he could have his speech immediately after school, or we would come back some days at 2:15 and he would have speech then. So it didn't take away from the other things that he was doing. It was the right choice for our child. And it was the right choice in keeping with what our school's rules were. You have to think about what's possible for you. Is the school, what are the rules for the school? And what can you get to, and when is somebody available? Because it's wonderful to sit there and say, well, my child has time to do APE, adaptive PE, at 7:15, and that's what makes the most sense for their program. But if there's no APE teacher that's available at 7:15, what use is it to anybody? Okay, so let's look at some considerations for both. For a pull out, this is when somebody comes to the classroom, picks your child up, and takes them someplace else to work on something with them. Now, when is that going to be appropriate? For a child who could benefit from a sensory break, this is ideal. If it happens to coincide and you can work to say, it would be really, we see that there's challenging behavior that happens at 2 o'clock. So it'd be great for my child to have a sensory break then, to go do some OT, kind of, get to walk outside, smell some fresh air, do something different, and come back rejuvenated. Then that might be ideal for your child. When another reason why you might want to do a pull-out is if there's a priority skill that really needs to be worked on one-on-one in order to get progress. And sometimes there are. You can make the case, well, can they do it in the classroom? But that's a lot of distraction. If you were going to teach me physics, you would not want to teach it to me in a room full of screaming third graders, right? I wouldn't be very successful at it. So if your priority list has your child needing to do something that really requires one-on-one, and for this period in time, not for all time, but for this period in time, needs some quiet and some sensory free, at least sensory taken down, not as much, then a pull-out might be ideal for your child. And of course, the last one, when it is the absolutely only way you're going to get services for a priority skill. You might think to yourself, well, I really wish that, and what would make more sense for my child is for it to be, in a group setting. But if you can't get that negotiated with the school, and it's a priority skill, you got to work with what you've got, right? And be looking towards seeing if you're actually getting the progress, though, because if you're not, then you can say to them, we're not getting the progress, we need to do something different. Okay, what about for the push in? What are some considerations? When academic and social goals are a priority, you really want to consider the push in, because if the child is behind academically, taking the child out of the classroom to work on something that isn't a priority, to me, is nuts, right? And when a lot of times hopefully you have a good teacher who says, well, this is a good time for the child to go out because we're not going to miss anything academically, but it's something that's social. And if social is a priority, man, you don't want your kid to miss that either. And then they come back and all the other kids got reinforced and got to play and do all these things, and your child didn't get the paycheck and didn't get the opportunity. Now they go on the playground and your child's got nobody to play with because the kids are all playing from the groups they were in before. Really have to be mindful of that. Really great to push. Here's a great reason to say to the school why to push for a push-in is if your child is demonstrating a skill in a certain, they've been able to do it in the one-on-one setting, but they're not demonstrating in the classroom, you can say to them, hey, we're working for fluency and generalization here, which means you got to do it in the actual setting. So let's have the support here. And there's a lot of things that they can do in the classroom, quite frankly. If they're working on core strength, they can work on that while they're doing other things. They're trained to do this. If it's appropriate for your child, push for the push in, because it can be very beneficial for the children. And of course, the last one, when it makes sense. When it makes sense. If they're going to work on something that they're also working on in the classroom and your child isn't having sensory issues, it just makes sense. Do it in the classroom. Our kids are already ostracized enough. If it doesn't make sense, I don't care if it's more convenient for them to do it in their room. That's not what this is about. It's about what works for our children and getting progress across a whole bunch of things. So maybe they're more comfortable working on it, but that doesn't make sense. I've shared before that my son, he's still working on language things, but I have one of the best speech and language pathologists that there is, because I've expressed, well, you know, we're not just working on language, we're working on language in a social setting. That's what my child needs. He needs more support socially than anything else. So to have him go down the hallway and be doing things with somebody one-on-one, not going to work. In the classroom setting, not going to work. It's too big. So we do lunch bunch, and 3 or 4 and it rotates, different kids get invited, the parents say it's okay, and they come and meet in the speech room during lunch and have a lunch date and play games, and it's supervised, and he's able to negotiate things, and they have different topics that they'll introduce to get them all talking. It helps him to make friends, it helps with his language, it helps with his social game. It's brilliant. It makes sense. So we always want to be thinking as parents about asking our schools and our support staff to have it make sense. So take some time, prioritize, and I think you'll find that it'll be really abundantly clear. And hey, by the way, for one thing, for speech, you might say, no, that makes sense to do a pull out for that. But for OT, it makes sense to do a push in. It's okay if they don't always match. It's what's best for your child that you want to be mindful of, and what's possible. But I know that you guys will see that this is really helpful, really, really helpful for your child to get the success that you want at school.